The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Again, another twist and turn in who is the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a huge fan. Please say good morning. Welcome back to 710 KNUS. Jack Cashill joins us. Good morning, sir. Thanks for doing the show again this morning. Yeah.
Hey, Peter, my pleasure. Anytime.
Well, now you've had a chance to look at all this, quote, new documents, the 68 Ansaturo's 68 app to extend the passport and the rest of this stuff, and the appearance of this new name, and then this video that was put together this weekend is fabulous. We have it up, 710knus.com. Jack's with American Thinker. He's the guy that broke the code on Dreams from My Father, which he obviously points out is quite overwhelming, that book was written by Bill Ayers, not written by the president. So where do we go and what do we do with all this this latest stuff, Jack?
Well, it's a question of, I think, of someone finally connecting all the dots, and they're out there to be connected. The question is, sometimes it's so tempting to connect dots that seem like they ought to be connected, but may not be related. Like, for instance, the death of Loretta Fuddy, which is, if you were writing a novel, it would be perfect,
Oh, yeah.
But in real life, Loretta Fuddy, by the way, is the Department of Health, the Hawaii person who was drowned or died of arrhythmia, allegedly, in this plane crash. She was uniquely deceased.
It's right out of the Clintons' playbook, isn't it? It really
is.
Well,
it certainly seems that way. It has a Ron Brown taint all about it, and yet, if you're being serious about your investigations into this sort of thing, as tempting as it is to link it, you can't do that, without knowing for sure.
I agree.
Because when I look at something like that, I say, okay, how could they have possibly planned this, and who could possibly have executed it? And it strikes me as unlikely.
Yeah.
That much said, it does, it does shine light on this whole, this whole phenomenon that, of her relationship to Ann Dunham and to this clown back in Indonesia who looks spittingly like Barack Obama.
But I thought, we've been looking at Frank Marshall Davis's mug since Joel Gilbert did his film. And then all of a sudden, there comes a curveball, throws the deuce, and this guy looks like him. So that's got everybody on the Internet talking this morning. But I love the Subbud cult. What do they believe in Subbud?
Well, it's hard to figure that out. And they make it sound very benign, Basically, they seem to believe that, it is, although it's something, even though Mr. Subbud, Master Subbud, whoever Chief Subbud was a Muslim, this is, it's not an Islamic religion. And I'm not even sure it's a religion as such. It seems like more like one of those kind of cults you'd find in California, like I Ching or something.
What was
Scientology? It would make you feel good.
Yeah, that's Scientology, yeah. They're buying big, aren't they?
But, and as much as I read about it, I still have a very hard time trying to figure out what it is. It's it has a Scientology kind of ring about it.
I think so too. Yeah, I do.
That much said, the connection, you keep seeing these names appear in the connection. Like, okay, so they all get alternative names apparently, and which can bring us back to Soebarkah, the name that was on that passport application, and that still, to my knowledge, remains. I haven't seen a convincing explanation of where that name came from. This, by the way, is how the name that was applied to a young Barack Obama by his mother on the passport application, and then it was crossed out for a variety of reasons. And I've seen different explanations for that.
What do you buy? Which one do you buy? These different. The one on the film, on the video, makes a lot of sense. That maybe he didn't have any birth certificate at all, and the mother's trying to find a way to get him one or whatever it was. But boy, there's a lot of curveballs in this, isn't there?
Yeah, I would say, there was an excellent article in American Thinker last Wednesday by a fellow who I wasn't aware of until he wrote the article. And he's an associate professor at California University, which means, A, he has tenure.
We had him on a radio show. We talked to him on Friday. Yeah, he's a PhD. He's got his, his ducks are in a row.
But I thought his thesis was the most compelling I've seen so far as to why they would go to the trouble of concealing and presumably forging a birth certificate if, in fact, Obama was born in Hawaii as claimed. And that is, as I'm sure you talked about on Friday, was to protect or to shield the public from the knowledge that Obama had been adopted and became an Indonesian citizen. And if that were true, it explains a lot of other things, including the trip to Pakistan when he was, I guess that would have been about 1980.
He was at Columbia.
81.
He was at Columbia then.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. That was between sophomore and junior years.
And
a trip that he never mentioned anywhere
ever
until 3 weeks after his passport files had been purged by an employee of Brennan, the guy who's now the head of the CIA.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And he actually,
so
he actually slips up because he makes this speech in San Francisco, if what I understand is true, and he says, well, he says this about going to, and he roomed at, we know at least this much, we're pretty sure, that at Columbia he stayed as a foreign national, that his two roomies were Pakistanis. Is that how
right.
you understand it that way?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
And as according to people who were there at the time, say that the university had a policy of taking foreign kids, foreign nationals or foreign-born, and they lived together. And so he's got two Pakis who happen to be Muslims, and the third roommate is Barack Hussein Obama, fill in the blank. And they all live together. And so now they want to take him home. And so, but he makes this speech in San Francisco. Am I right so far about this?
It was a fundraising speech in 2008.
And he talked about going to Pakistan, but first he had to go back to Jakarta to visit his mother, Stanley Ann. Well, they time-framed that, and Stanley Ann was no longer in Jakarta. She was back in Hawaii, had been back in Hawaii for quite a time. And so this is what some people's suspicion or some people argue or ask, did he go to Jakarta to get his Indonesian passport that he was granted as a little boy renewed so he could travel into Pakistan as an Indonesian Muslim, and that way avoid any problems. Now, traveling to Pakistan when he went, or at least that time that he goes, it wasn't a no-go. It wasn't like North Korea or Cuba, but it was, the American State Department, Jack, it advises you not to go there. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
And so
it was well, you're right. It wasn't off limits, but it was you were discouraged from going there.
And so he goes to, and all his travel records have been suppressed, suspended, destroyed, whatever they've done with them, and it doesn't say who he traveled with. And in fact, you figure in a book where he's talking about traveling the world and seeing all these things that enlighten his life, what's missing from that narrative?
Well, it's interesting in reading the Obama biographies, and by the way, one of them, I believe it's Janie Scott's, puts Obama's mother in Jakarta at the time, which doesn't change the story really. But what's interesting is that Scott and Remnick both talk about the trip. David Remnick is the New York editor who just told Charlie Rose last week there's not a hint of scandal about the Obama administration.
I love that, yeah.
They had him going in different directions. You think you're a biographer and you're telling this a pretty critical part of the story about his trip to Pakistan. You would get that straight. I mean, in other words, in one telling, I forget whose, but I think it was Remnick's. He goes to Pakistan and then Indonesia, and Scott's, he goes to Indonesia and then to Pakistan. They have the timing different in each book. It was in the summer during Ramadan. We hear that. But it was, one was before Ramadan and afterwards. The biographers have never been able to get the story straight. These are people who spend years digging into this, and they can't get the story straight or choose not to get the story straight. And then we are somehow crazy for doubting them or doubting the official narrative. And what's intriguing, too, Peter, is that in Audacity of Hope particularly, and in Dreams from My Father, he had every reason to talk about his Pakistani trip, because especially in the latter book, he was beginning to build his foreign policy credentials. And part of his strategy on the campaign tour during the primary season was to show that his international experience was comparable to Hillary's, if not superior, because he had a boots-on-the-ground kind of feel for it. And but he kept the Pakistan story out of the narrative until 3 weeks after his buddies pilfered the passport files.
That's amazing.
And I personally think that is the MacGuffin of the whole story is the Brennan people's incursion into the passport files. A story that's been remarkably underreported. It did happen. No one, even the major networks admit that one of Brennan's people do go in there and do this. As cover, they threw in, oh yeah, he looked at McCain's and Hillary's or whatever, but he went 3 times into the Obama files. And that's where I think they had to get that, make sure that that passport record was straight before he could start talking about his Pakistani visit.
Yeah. I don't know. We spoke with Jerry this morning, obviously with you. We spoke with Joel Gilbert. We've spoken with Kistner. We've talked to all these different people. Everybody arrives sort of at the same place that begins with, I have no idea how this fits. I have no idea what this does to the narrative, but it certainly at least changes it somewhat, or it fortifies or shores up sort of some of the original or early questions. Is that fair, Jack?
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.